Hey everybody, my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the Bernie Sanders-Ted Cruz debate regarding tax reform, and just kind of discuss some of the points that were made during the debate and clarify a couple things. Okay, so first thing I want to clarify is a little bit of history on taxation. So basically, if you're not familiar with the history of the income tax, a good summary of it's this. It started in 1913, top tax rate was about 7%, and that was really, you had to be pretty wealthy to be paying that 7% tax. It only took a few years, come 1920, and the tax rate was already 90%. Now, under Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, rates go back down to 20, huge boom to the economy, you have the roaring 20s. Herbert Hoover then brings it up to the 60s, so there's a huge tax increase under Herbert Hoover. And then another huge tax increase under FDR, which brings it back up to the 90s. It stays pretty much at the 90s until Kennedy. Kennedy brings it down to the 70s. Nice boost to the economy. Reagan brings it back down to the high 20s. Boom to the economy. And then kind of after that, it kind of goes up a few points, down a few points. So it kind of trickles up a little bit under Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. And then just kind of trickles down a little bit under George W. Bush. These aren't huge radical changes in the tax code like many of the ones that had a much more significant effect on the economy from before. And then again went up just a little bit under Obama. So really, since Reagan, there hasn't been any huge transformational shifts in the tax code. Okay, and this is important because Ted Cruz was right to mention that there were pretty significant benefits to the economy when you took a look at the Reagan, the Kennedy. Not mentioned was the 1920 tax cuts. Okay, all of those did have a very significant effect on the economy, while the George W. Bush tax cuts, not so much. But again, it was a much milder tax cut in scope. But at the same time, other factors to take into consideration, you had huge deficits occurring mainly due to military spending. That's going to crowd out other investment in the economy, because if the government borrows money, that means somebody else can't borrow that money. So it kind of offsets the benefit. Okay, and the other thing you have to realize is that all tax cuts do, from an economic perspective. Now, of course, from a moral perspective, letting you keep your money is a moral thing to do because it's your money and it's your property. But from an economic perspective, what cutting taxes does allows you to keep your money. And when you keep your money, you can do a couple things with it. You can consume with it. You can invest it. Well, pretty much that's what you can do with it. You can either spend it in a way that allows you to enjoy something now, or spend it in a way that hopefully allows you to be able to buy more later. That's investment. So when you start a business, because you're hoping it'll cause you to have more money later. You save money in a bank because you hope it'll result in you having more money later. So that's investment. Problem is, you had a bigger effect in the 1920s. You had a bigger effect in the past because you had less regulations, which wasn't discussed. Because what happens is that if it becomes really hard for you to invest that money, to start a new business, etc., then you're going to have a less investment, and a lot more of that tax cut turns into consumption, because that's going to be the easier way for me to use my money. So regulations can inhibit my ability to use that money for investment. And it's that new business, or that at least that attempt at a business that turns out to be successful, that really creates new jobs, creates sometimes even new industries that really help move the economy forward. That investment in new technologies that allow all sorts of new inefficiencies that moves an economy forward. So the harder it is to do those things, because the greater the regulatory structure on top of it, the less benefit you're going to get from more capital. So not only was the Bush tax cuts a smaller injection of new capital via freed up money from lower taxes, and then on top of it was offset by extra use of capital from deficit spending during that time, but on top of it you had a bigger regulatory structure at the time than you did in the 80s, than you did, and especially in the 1920s, where you had a huge effect. So again, you're going to get much more bang for every dollar of tax cuts, the more people can actually use it for stuff. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. So as history moves forward, the regulatory structure gets bigger, then the marginal benefit of that additional dollar becomes less and less and less. Not because it's not because it's not good policy, but it's because other bad policies prevent it from being as good. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to point out. Next, they talked about the estate tax, and basically they kept talking about the farmers, and then Bernie saying like, okay, there's not that many farmers, but it doesn't matter, even if it's the Walton family. Okay, when people talk about the billions and billions that the Walton family is worth, that's net worth. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is that net worth is not a pile of cash. When someone is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, it doesn't mean they have hundreds of billion dollars that are just sitting there, kept away from everybody. That's, I think, the impression that most people have. It just means they have stuff that's worth billions of dollars. And the problem is, when you die and your estate gets valued for the purpose of estate tax, the tax doesn't get paid in stuff, it gets paid in cash. So if you're worth $100 billion, okay, that means you're paying around a $50 billion tax bill to the IRS. And that has to be paid in cash. So if you don't have $50 billion of cash lying around, that means you're going to have to liquidate assets, which for the Walton family would mean basically ripping apart Walmart and selling off its individual parts until they can raise $50 million. Now the question is, just because someone buys a piece of Walmart doesn't mean they're going to keep it the same way. So for example, like right now, Staples is in the process of basically selling its retail division to Office Depot, because the company that bought Staples doesn't want its retail sector. And there's a possibility that, you know, if this deal doesn't go through, that maybe all those stores get closed. So point is, the Walton family wants Walmart to operate these retail stores, but if the Walton family has to then sell these parts of Walmart to other owners, they may not keep those stores open. Those jobs may not continue to be there. So there is a legitimate concern to people who are employed by business owners because of the estate tax. Because again, people's net worth isn't cash. People's net worth, when people are worth billions, because estate tax is not a tax on income, it's a tax on your net worth when you die. That has to be paid in cash. And whatever. So basically, again, you're worth $100 billion, you have to pay $50 billion in cash, even if you don't have $50 billion in cash. Okay, so that's a legitimate concern by Ted Cruz that I don't think either of them really perfectly explained. Okay, and then there's the issue of Denmark. Okay, so yes, Denmark, you do have to pay a lot more taxes. And the criticism was correct that in order for you to be able to fund the kind of services that a country like Denmark provides you, you need to tax everyone more. Okay, and Bernie Sanders did kind of keep trying to dodge that by focusing on millionaires and billionaires. But another thing they forget is that a big reason why European nations are able to do that, even despite the higher level of taxes, is because sort of the military subsidy of the U.S. In the sense that since the U.S. spends so much money on its military and basically being the policeman of the world, it means everybody else spends less. So European nations spend a lot less on their militaries and defense because the U.S. spends so much. So the U.S. basically in turn became sort of that Denmark-like state where we decide to spend a larger portion on social welfare and tax everyone more. The U.S. would not have the economy or the wherewithal to maintain its current level of military, which would mean all the sizable welfare states of European nations probably wouldn't be sustainable, because they would then have to spend more on their military, which means they would probably have to tax more than they already do. Okay, so that's a thing to consider. Okay, for the most part, that's a lot of what they focused on the debate, so I'll leave it at that. My name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Please leave comments and subscribe on YouTube and share this video with your friends. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day and enjoy.